Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with Tarpley.net. You ought to order 9/11 Synthetic Terror, made in USA, which is now displayed at the top of the product list that you have there. You cannot understand the whole 9/11 question without that fundamental book, and it's above all the question of the drills, the exercises, the war games, the military operations that underlay the entire thing, how the operation was bootlegged and conduited through the existing military security bureaucracy of the United States. It was a large operation. In terms of the drill count, how many drills do we have bearing on 9/11, meaning preparatory in the 2, 3, 4 years, or sometimes more, in advance, on the day of and scheduled for soon after? That count had reached 25 a while ago, and it's now up to 45. We have 45 drills bearing on 9/11. Some of them go back to the early 1990s, but they are all key in preparing the options, preparing the capabilities. Now, that's coming up, so get your copy of 9/11 Synthetic Terror, made in USA. The other thing, we're just looking at these markets, right? The market was up 200 this morning, then it was down 250. Then when Trichet said he would start buying Italian and Spanish bonds, the plunge protection team obviously intervened heavily, and there was a 400-point swing. It went from minus 250 to 200 to 150 up, and it's now drifting down again. So it'll be interesting to see how the market closes on this Friday, August 5th. But back to the international front. The question now of Egypt. The trial of Mubarak. A school of thought is that the U.S., through Field Marshal Tantawi, that Samantha Power and indeed Michael McFaul and Cass Sunstein, because that's the clique, in the Obama White House have told Field Marshal Tantawi that they should put Mubarak on trial and probably give him the Milosevic treatment. Liquidate him, essentially assassinate him, as a means of intimidating other Arab leaders, maybe as a warning to somebody like Assad. I think things have gone too far for this to have much effect. But that, I think, is what it is. You can see that in the composition of the mob in the streets, the Muslim Brotherhood, the infamous Ikhwan, is gaining. This is now beginning to scare some people on the U.S. side. But the idea itself of having a kangaroo court or show trial tribunal for Mubarak, I would urge people, think about that very carefully. One of the big mistakes in the French Revolution was, in particular, the execution of Marie Antoinette. This did not help them. This then became a cause célèbre around the world that allowed, Edmund Burke and all sorts of other people to start screaming that it was time to mobilize military force against the French revolutionary governments, whatever they were. And I think with Egypt, what might play well inside the country in terms of resentment against Mubarak won't play well worldwide. Now, in Syria, we are certainly in Syria at the Kabagnac, Radetzky, Windischgrätz moment, right? I'm talking 1848 here, but the moment when the army simply decides to put down the destabilization. You have been dealing with death squads of the Muslim Brotherhood. Commandos of the Ikhwan have been carrying out a lot of killing, and it seems to me that what is happening now is that the Syrian armed forces are crushing those forces. The United Nations Security Council, meddling as always in internal affairs, have come up with not a resolution, but a presidential statement, a statement by the president of the council, which criticizes the Syrian crackdown in the obvious ways. But notice it's not a resolution, and they're a million miles away from a Chapter 7 resolution, which would mean a military intervention. Interesting also that when the presidential statement was read, the Lebanese delegate repudiated it. Now, it's also pointed out that you think Syria is isolated. They're not. Syria gets support from Iraq, that is to say from Maliki, and also from Iran, and of course from Hezbollah. There's also something with Turkey. Turkey may have been encouraged to back off. Looks like Syria is telling Turkey, look, there are Alawites, this ethnic group which Assad belongs to in the Assad dynasty. There are Alawites in Turkey. If you don't back off, those Alawites are going to be very unhappy with you. And indeed, there are Kurds in Turkey, and maybe Syria has ways of stirring up the Kurds through their own Kurds. So maybe Turkey has been taught a lesson in meddling. That might be interesting. Most important, of course, Libya. We've had the assassination of Yunus, the top military commander. The prime suspect here is the CIA in the following way. Yunus had, of course, been linked to Gaddafi until he turned his coat in February. He was likely to have been assassinated by the February 18th Martyrs Brigade, which is a branch of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, meaning Al-Qaeda. Yunus and two important colonels, two important people were killed with him, killed by this branch of Al-Qaeda, essentially. Now, the person that this helps is, of course, Haftar. Khalifa Haftar, I guess, to go with the New York Times, was the one who had been living here in Langley, Virginia, or near there, close to the CIA, had been part of the destabilization of Gaddafi for decades. He was sent in. He expected to be the military commander, but it turned out to be Yunus. And we had those stories, right, persistent stories, that the Yunus forces would call in NATO airstrikes on the Haftar forces, and the Haftar forces, with more success, would call in NATO airstrikes on the Yunus forces. Since Yunus is a member of the Obeidi tribe, this is a very big deal. Tribal warfare could break out. There's been an attempt now in the days after the death of Yunus for the Transitional Council, this gang, the rebel gaggle of Benghazi, to have a crackdown, that is, to eliminate opposition. But the word is the TNC, the Benghazi Rebel Council, is in total chaos. We may have a civil war within a civil war of essentially the Haftar CIA forces and their dupes, Al-Qaeda, against the Yunus and Obeidi forces, which are considerable in their own right. In the middle of all this, we're told that Qamis Gaddafi is now being claimed as assassinated by NATO, but the government denies it. Our best wishes go to people who are fighting against NATO aggression. And Saif al-Islam has shocked the hidebound imperialist thinkers here in Washington by saying, I'll do anything to stay in power. I'll make a deal with the Islamic fundamentalists. And, of course, why not? Every reason to split the opposition front with any kind of a reasonable offer. So I would say on the whole, the rebellion could collapse, that NATO is increasingly desperate. They bombed the television. They're trying to kill the leading figures of the existing Libyan government, and they're just reduced to this policy of assassination and international mayhem. Then, as we mentioned before, the Uyghurs are revolting once again in Chinese Turkestan, in Xinjiang province, and we're looking, as always, at Rabia Kadir of the World Uyghur Federation, also out here in Northern Virginia. What a playground of democratic movements. I should point out on Libya, the Washington embassy of the Libyan Arab Socialist Jamahiriya, the Libyan embassy here in the capital of the United States, has now been turned over to the Benghazi Rebel Council. I warn the U.S. government, the FBI, and everybody else. That means it will become a nest of terrorism. Al-Qaeda will move into a safe haven in the middle of Washington, D.C. This will become a big local issue. We'll be back in a minute.